Guys, I've got to, hang on. We're 2 for 2 on amazing smelling Friedmans here in the studio. I don't know what it is. Got these funnel cakes in the studio. They smell so good. Anyways, welcome back to the channel. I've got this beautiful 50-watt Friedman Smallbox amp to show you guys. As you heard in the demo, it is a Marshall style amp, and it's a 2-channel amp that adheres pretty tightly to the old school Marshall formula in terms of just the straightforward, no nonsense, just a few little tweaks and bells and whistles here in terms of like little extra features that you wouldn't get in your typical Marshall amp. So we'll go through that and we'll hear some more sounds. We'll do some drop tuning and I'll show you some of the clean sounds. I've got the Origin Effects MEQ driver up here. This amp takes boost very well, but I feel like the MEQ driver just sits just right and doesn't color the sound too heavily. I really like the way that the amp sounds, and I don't want to color that with different types of gains that, like say maybe the Klon would do or something like that. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the amp, and all the information you want is down in the timestamps down below, so you can jump to whatever part of the video that you want. But for now, let's talk about what features this amp has. Okay, so as you can see, you've got presence, bass, middle, treble, and that's all shared between the 2 channels. You have separate controls for your channel 1 and channel 2, and then you also have separate gain controls for channel 1 and channel 2. Then you have your switch, foot switch jack, input jack, and on the back there's a depth control. The depth control right now is set right at noon, which is where I think it sounds and feels the best. You've got your physical channel selector here, and then also for this switch right here, it's a 3-way bright switch, and it functions a lot like the switch on his Plex amp, where in the middle it's bypassed. On the right, to the left, it adds a little bit more bite and teeth to the clean channel, and over on the right over here, it adds a little bit more, it pushes it a little bit more. Also with, just like on the Plex, the more you crank the gain on channel 1, the less of an effect that the bright caps are going to have on the sound. So once you have this gain on channel 1, if you've got this thing dimed, you won't hear any difference switching between the 3 different selections. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, I've seen people sort of billing this as a Plexi alternative, and I don't think that's entirely accurate, specifically after coming from his Plex amp. I feel like these are two very, very different animals. And what I mean by that is Gain 1 is Plexi-like in the sense that it's got a nice clean Plexi sound, and if you bump the bright switch over here, you can get a little bit of a light pushed Plexi sound, and then over here where you get a little bit more gain, it's sort of like a light crunch. It's nothing nearly as rowdy as the actual Plex amp would get, or a real Plexi if you've just got the thing dimed out. Those have way more gain than what channel 1 on this amp has. So when this is described as being like a Plexi, channel 1 here is a very polite, clean, big, huge headroom. That's the thing that I like about this, that the real Plexi really is a little bit tricky to dial in, is a big, loud, clean sound. So that's what I really like about channel 1 on this amp. Channel 2 on the amp has way more gain than a Plexi. It's like heavily boosted Plexi sound, but in my opinion, it reminds me a little bit more of a Jubilee, kind of like the structure and the sound of a Jubilee. Okay, let's go through some of the sounds on channel 1, and I've got the amp running into the Splawn cabinet with the Scumback speakers, and it's mic'd up with a 421 and an Audix i5. So as you can hear, even with the gain on the clean channel past noon, it's still big, it's fat and thick, and it's got a lot of headroom. And I really like that about this amp. And it's not typical of old Marshall. So that's what I really like, the way that this type of sound is blended with the ability to also get some of like the more classic high gain Marshall sounds. All right, let's go over to the other bright selection over here. So you can hear it immediately has a little bit more bite to it. So this is with the capacitors bypassed. It's a little soft on the top end for my personal preferences, so what what I'll do is I'll back the gain back down and then go over to the other bright selection to kind of crunch it up just a little bit. All right, let's check out the boost on top of that. And the mid-range selector is on the 1 kilohertz setting. All right, I'm gonna grab a different guitar and we're gonna check out some of the high gain sounds out of this thing with a drop tuning setup. Okay, that was a fun little detour, but let's get back to some of the less aggressive stuff, which I really feel like this amp sort of thrives in that area. So let's go ahead and I'm gonna dial some stuff back to sort of where I had it originally. And tell you what, we're gonna start with low gain on channel 2 and slowly build our way up and kind of hear how the gain introduces itself. All right, I'm gonna back it down and we're gonna go back to the drive pedal here, and we'll just hear it with the 3 different mid-range boost frequencies so you can hear sort of how that can affect the sound of this. So I'm gonna go ahead and back the gain. I really like it right around this 2 o'clock area, 3 o'clock maybe at the most. Once you get around 3 o'clock or higher on the gain, the drive pedal starts to become a bit of a liability in terms of the overall clarity of the sound. So let's keep it, I'm gonna keep it right around here, and I'll tell you what, I'll put it back further and then we'll hit the amp with more gain from the pedal, and then I'll pull the pedal gain back and then we'll kind of raise the preamp gain in the amp, and so you can kind of hear how that differs. 800 hertz. $1.3K. And back to 1 kilohertz. So I really think that the 1 kilohertz setting on the pedal, it complements the voice of this amp the best in my opinion. All right, I'm gonna back the drive on the pedal down and we're gonna increase the gain on the amp. All right, so those are some of the sounds that you can expect to get out of the Friedman Smallbox 50. And like I said earlier, the amp loves all different types of gain pedals. The Klon sounds great in front of it. The MEQ driver sounds great in front of it. The KSR Hera sounded really good in front of it. It was like very punchy, sharper, much sharper sound. So if you want a little bit more of an aggressive attack with this amp, the KSR Hera, I feel like it probably was the most aggressive without the amp losing its composure. All right, now about this time I would be talking about how this amp did on stage in the post-gig report, but unfortunately I did not take this amp on stage to our last show, and the main reason why is because it is unreal how loud this amp is, and it's also, it has to be loud for this amp to sound its best, and it just was not a practical amp for me to take on stage with how our band operates and how we establish our sound on stage. Now, I could have taken the aux box or the hot plate and used some impulses like that, but to be perfectly honest with you guys, the way that this amp sounds through a real speaker cabinet is so far beyond how it sounds with any sort of speaker emulation. It's almost one of those things where you can't unhear how much better the sound is through a cabinet. And this is one of the very few amps that I've played that has such an enormous gap between how good it sounds with a cabinet versus how good it sounds with emulation. And it didn't sound bad with the aux box, for example. It sounded pretty good through the aux box, but the difference in quality is just night and day. And I really didn't want to just completely demolish the entire bar that we played at with that I would have taken this amp to with the stage sound, just in order to get that awesome speaker sound from the amp. So unfortunately this amp stayed at home. So I think that sort of leads me into who is this amp for. And I feel like if you're someone who can who you have an environment where you're playing where you can afford to turn up the amp to very, very loud volumes, this is an amazing amp. If you have a studio where you've got proper sound treatment, or you play much bigger venues where the sound man really doesn't care how loud you get, I think that this is an absolutely incredible amp. And it just, the place that we played, it was a very small biker bar, and it's not a place to have just crazy high volume on stage. So unfortunately, the Friedman stayed home, and I ended up taking the Mark 7 and just ran DI for that show. So anyways, that's sort of where I'm at in terms of what type of musician should consider this amp. If you want a absolutely amazingly well-made, great sounding, flexible 2-channel Marshall style amp, if you want that big open clean sound, or you want a light kind of a crunchy plexi type sound, but you also want to have the ability to have a completely separate channel for your high gain stuff, I feel like this is a very, very good amp in that regard. Like, there's not a whole lot of amps that will let you have just that just right Marshall crunch sound, the low gain crunch sound for like blues and stuff like that, or a very big high headroom clean channel, and then also have a lead channel it's still got the old Marshall DNA sound in there, but I think it's more of like the old 80s Marshall versus the old 60s and 70s Marshalls. It honestly kind of reminds me of the Jubilee Boosted, but with a bit more composure to the sound and the structure. It's a much more, I guess, a more polite version of that type of sound, and a little bit less unhinged and rough around the edges. It's a bit more of a polished and well-composed sound when pushed really hard in terms of the gain and the volume. It doesn't get loose, and it doesn't sound like the amp is hating itself the way that the Plex did and the way that the Jubilee do when you really have those amps cranked. And for me, that's where there's a little bit of friction with this amp. I feel like with those old Marshall sounds, like the 80s and the 70s Marshall sounds, I prefer to have that almost like on the verge of just completely falling apart, but still sort of composed. That's kind of where my own personal preferences lie with the way that an old Marshall should sound and feel. And so for me, it's a bit of a weird sensation hearing the voice of that kind of the Jubilee type era of voicing, but without the messiness or the sloppiness that comes along with it. And for me, again, I feel like that messiness is sort of part of the sound that I gravitate towards, and having a more refined and smoothed up and kind of more well put together, well-mannered sound, it's a little bit weird for me to adjust to. Now let's get to what I think is probably this amp's biggest weakness. It's the fact that the Runt 50 exists. And as someone who used to own the Runt 50, I feel like the territory that this amp and the Runt occupy are dangerously similar. The Venn diagram between the sounds that you can get from this amp and the Runt 50 almost completely overlap, in my opinion. Now, the two amps are built very differently, and the price point reflects that. This is a all hand-wired, much more traditional amplifier, and the Runt is more your typical PCB designed amplifier. However, I feel like the only real difference between the Runt and this amp is that this amp does give you the flexibility on channel 1 to have a nice creamy pushed low gain old crunch plexi type sound. And if you want that type of sound, the Runt is not going to make you happy. That's something this amp does very well. The Runt clean channel is a clean channel. If you push it, it gets a little bit crunchy, but it doesn't have the character of the old Marshall the way that this amp does. And the lead channel on both amps, I feel like this amp has a little bit more gain to it, but again, if you've got a boost pedal, it sort of erases that difference. So if you've got a boost pedal and the Runt, you can get most of the sounds I feel like that this amp has in terms of the higher gain sounds. Now, all of that is not to say that this is a bad amp. I think this is an absolutely phenomenal amp. It has tons of great sounds in it. I just feel like for me personally, the sounds that I want from an amplifier, I can get everything that I need out of the Runt, and this amp doesn't really offer me personally anything that I feel compelled to choose it over the Runt. So that's kind of where I'm at with this amp. I really like it, but I feel like the Runt is a stronger offering for the type of music and the playing that I do. So if you're looking for something a little bit more affordable that's still in the Friedman family, that has a lot of the same features and sounds, I feel like the Runt is also worth giving a strong look. Either way, they're both phenomenal. You can't go wrong. You'll be happy with both of them. All right, well, that is going to wrap up this video. A huge thanks to the guys at Zzounds for sending me this amp to try out here in the studio and to spend some time with it and to show it to you guys. If you guys want to check it out, I will have a link to their website down in the video description. The affiliate links down there don't cost you guys anything extra, but they do help support all the work that I do here on my channel. I'm also wrapping up some capture work on this amp. I've got all of the neural DSP captures done. There's about a dozen of those, both DI and with cab sim on there. All the different sounds, boosted, unboosted, a couple of different boost sounds, and I'm about to get started here on the Tonex captures. So whether you have either of those platforms, if you're interested in getting your hands on some of those, you can find my email address down in the video description. Hit me up and I will get you hooked up with those captures. And I'm starting to put like kind of a pick of the litter type, if you want to consider it that. I'm starting to take one capture that I really like from each of these packs and making them public so that you guys can check them out. And if you enjoy it and you want more variations on that, maybe you want a DI version so you can use your own cab simulation, that's when you would, hit me up and you can get way more captures that are going to be sort of along the same quality as the ones that I'm making public. And lastly, if you are not subscribed and you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing. It's completely free and it helps small channels like me, helps us grow and get more videos out there to sort of feed the algorithm and get videos in front of more new viewers. So if you aren't subscribed, hitting the subscribe would be hugely appreciated. Again, totally free, takes 2 seconds. So yeah, I appreciate all of you guys hanging out with me and I will see you in the next video. Take care, bye.